Seems like there are two real types of fitness people once you get into your 40s. There's either the people who have been doing it religiously for all their life, or there's the people who finally realize that they need to do something for their health and fitness if they want to age gracefully for the rest of their life. So this is for those people in the second group. It's for people who are relatively newcomers to fitness and strength training, or it's for people who maybe used to be in shape, let it go for a long period of time, and have just come back into it in their 30s or 40s and basically back to being a beginner again. So for some of you, this may seem like a refresher course on how to train and eat properly, but based on what I see with a lot of people, this is information a lot of people need to know. When I see comments in my YouTube section saying things like, I know what I need to do, but then you dig into it and the person's still overweight, still isn't very strong, it's not about what you know, it's about what you can apply. And the big question always is, what are the real changes when we get over 40? While there aren't a huge amount, there are definitely some things we need to look at more versus when we were younger. Let's start the training session right from as soon as you walk in the door, and that means you need to start with an adequate warm-up. I've said it multiple times, but the days of being able to walk into the gym, slap a couple of plates on the bar and go straight into your first set are long gone if you plan to stay injury-free in your 40s and later. So in other words, never skip a warm-up. A warm-up really comes in multiple parts. The first part is a general warm-up where we are actually trying to raise body temperature, because raising body temperature means that the muscles become warmer and more pliable, allows you to exert more strength and power, your joints become better lubricated and less likely to be hurt, and coordination even increases because the brain wakes up and understands what it is you're about to do. The warm-up is where the rest of the workout gets set in place. A poor warm-up leads to a poor workout. If you don't warm up, you are much more likely to get injured. And the downside of lifting over 40 is that if you get injured, it's not going to be a week or two off anymore. It might be months and months before that thing finally heals itself, because injury healing rates become much less. So what does a good warm-up look like? A good warm-up looks like 5 to 10 minutes of actual warm-up activity if it's cold. If it's warm like it's been in Australia up until recently, you're probably already actually physically warm and there's no need to perform that part of the warm-up, and then go straight into joint mobility. Now, joint mobility simply means circling all the major joints around, for the simple reason that more information comes from joints than comes from muscles. In other words, if you want your brain to better understand and be able to exert strength, you need to make sure the joints are giving adequate information to the brain. That's such an important part of coordination and performance, and people neglect it all the time, but joint mobility is a great way to start a warm-up while setting you up for success later on. The second part of the general part of the warm-up is that now you need to do some targeted activity for the things you're going to do. If you're going to do a pressing workout, maybe now is the time to do some push-ups and to fire up the opposing muscles like your rotator cuff, your upper back, and maybe even the lats, so that all the antagonists are fired up as well and the agonists can work at 100%. And then finally, you're going to go into the first few sets of your first exercise. So if it was going to be bench press, maybe you'll do a set with just the empty bar, and then probably a set at 50%, a set at 60%, and now we're actually getting close to the working weights. But you can see up till now, it's maybe 20 minutes from the time I came into the gym before my first work set of my first exercise. In general, if you're doing a lower body workout, you're going to need longer to warm the lower body up than you are the upper body. For me, the difference is about 10 minutes. A good lower body workout starts with about a 30-minute warm-up versus only about 20 minutes for the upper body. When it comes to lifting form, one of the most important things is to really tighten up your technique. I see a lot of older lifters basically letting technique go out the window and saying things like, oh, it's how I've always done it. Yeah, but you weren't always 60 years old either. So maybe now's the time to start doing things properly before you really hurt something. So as form gets tighter, injury risk will go down. If you look at the best lifters in the world, they're not lifting with the worst technique when they're winning Olympic gold medals. They're lifting with the best technique. So technique is both performance enhancing as well as injury preventative. One of the best ways you can do this is by simply making sure that eccentric portion of the lift, that's the part of the lift where you're lowering the weight, is done slightly longer and slower to make sure you're really in the bottom position. So if I was benching, for instance, instead of dropping the bar on myself, I will actually work to draw the bar down towards myself, which puts me in the perfect position to begin the press on the concentric phase of the rep. So a slightly slower and longer eccentric sets you up for a more powerful, stable, and better formed concentric rep. And while we're talking about reps, let's talk about rep ranges. Honestly, I can't see any point for a 40-plus-year-old to be doing a 1 RM in the gym anyway. What difference does it make what your maximum squat or bench is unless you happen to be competing in powerlifting? For everyone else who's just training for health, those things make no difference and only expose you to really high risks of injury. Instead, consider if you want to test your strength using a 3 to 5 rep max, which means that the loads are relatively light compared to what your 1 might be. And then when it comes to training, maybe instead of training in the 3 to 5 rep range, consider the 5 to 10 rep range, which is really going to give you a great blend of both strength training and metabolic gains, which is muscle size and gain. Research shows that muscle size is unaffected by rep range, whether it's 5 reps, 15 reps, or 25 reps, as long as you're working to failure or close to failure in each of those sets. So it allows you to use less weight and achieve the same effect even though you're using much less weight. The key is to work to failure or near failure regardless of the rep range. It's obviously just going to be much safer doing a set of 15 to failure than it is a set of 5. Now this next part's not going to be very popular at all. Most people, when it comes to fitness, try to do the hardest thing as often as possible and wonder why they fail. If you come from a dead stop with your fitness and try to go to running at 100 miles an hour, you are going to get hurt. It may not happen this week or next week, but sooner or later, you're going to crash and burn. You might get actually hurt, requiring an extended period of time off, or you might get sick. If we start with the smallest amount of something, we can always add. The danger with starting with something in the middle ground, let's say you started with 3 sets of an exercise and you failed to get the result that you wanted. Is it because you're doing too much or is it because you're doing too little? It's very hard to know whether you should add sets or subtract them. If you start with 1 set and you fail to get the result you want, the answer is obvious. You have to do more. So when we start with the smallest amount, the pathway is very, very obvious. So instead of starting with 5 workouts a week, start with 1 or 2. Instead of starting with 3 to 4 sets per exercise, start with 1 genuine work set where you work to failure or close to failure for each exercise. And when you fail to respond after a period of time, adding a set is very easy. And the point where you know where to add something is where you are no longer responding physically. So that means you're either not able to add reps to that set or you're no longer able to add weight to that exercise. But at the point where progress becomes impossible, now it's time to increase the volume. Once you've gotten to the point where volume becomes unmanageable within a workout, so maybe you started with 10 exercises for a single set each, you built it up to 3 sets of exercises for 10 exercises, you're now doing 30 sets per workout. That's starting to become quite a big workout. Now it's time to add another workout during the week. So you go from 2 sessions to 3 sessions and slowly you build it all up again back to the point where you're no longer progressing, and then you can consider adding a 4th workout in, and so on and so on. When I see these programs with people training twice a day, 5 or 6 days a week, and it's for 40 and 50-year-olds, and the people wonder why they're not progressing, they're simply doing too much. And by trying to do too much, all of it is done at such a low level of effort that they're not actually forcing their body to adapt and working hard enough to create change. It's much better to do less that you can recover from properly and push it hard enough to force adaptation than it is to do much more but at a much, much lower level of work and basically just spin your wheels the entire time. When it comes to adding to each exercise, either add reps or weight from session to session. Don't do both at the same time. You don't need to add 5 reps per workout. You simply need to do more than you did the last time, which can be as little as doing 1 extra rep. If you can add more than 2 reps, I would suggest now's the time to add some weight. When you look at how much weight to add, even adding as little as 1.25 kilo or about 2.5 pounds to an upper body exercise and double that for the legs, so 5 pound or 2.5 kilo to a lower body exercise, is going to be adequate to keep forcing change and keep you adapting. There's no need to try to add 10, 20, 30 kilo at a time. You can take your time with this and really eke out the gains over an extended period of time. Keep your training momentum, reduce injury risk, and make sure the momentum stays high. Now, like it or not, at some point you will need to recover. The best expression I've ever heard about peaks and valleys when it comes to training is that if it wasn't a peak, there wouldn't be a valley afterwards. After every single peak in nature, there is a valley. So if you've accomplished something that you've never accomplished before, the next step is going to be a step down into the valley. You can either choose to step into that valley with control and be in charge of the situation, or you can trip and fall into that valley and end up sick or hurt. The choice is yours. I suggest you plan for deliberate deloads every 3 to 4 weeks. And to be honest, For guys in their 40s and 50s, I'd really prefer 3 weeks versus every 4. So that's gonna be 2 hard weeks with a 3rd week easy. One way to make this work really well for you, if you want to use 4 weeks, is that the last week of every month can be the deload week. And the reason I say that is because quite often in people's offices, the last week of every month is a little bit hectic. There's people struggling to get budgets, there's people doing tax invoices, there's all these admin tasks that go with running a business or even being employed by a business that tend to happen at end of month. Because we know the work situation is stressful, it actually makes sense to decrease training stress during that period so that everything's on a much more even keel. You'll find you come back to the next active week refreshed, energized, and really ready to push hard again for the next 2 or 3 weeks straight. I know for me, when I'm training at my hardest, I use every 3rd week as a recovery week, and the first week I feel great. The second week, all I'm thinking is, thank God I've only got 4 or 5 days till I do a recovery week. I do the recovery week, I feel pretty tired for the first half of the week. By the time we get to the end of the week, I'm just about leaping out of my skin, ready to run through walls. And then we start the process again. I get into the second week and I've got my fingers crossed that I can hold on until I get to that recovery week again. But knowing I've only ever got to train a maximum of 2 weeks at a time before a recovery week means I can push really, really hard when I'm in my active weeks. The second part of this is planning a deliberate off season. Most amateur athletes think they can train year round at the same intensity and try to match the pros somehow. Pros have an off season, right? When was the last time you took a deliberate break from training just like a pro athlete would at the end of their season? The natural place to put this is around Christmas and New Year's and take a deliberate 2-week, completely deloaded period of time so that you can come back from then even better. You need to allow this deliberate softening up process to occur so that you can reach a new peak the next year. When I look back at the training diaries of my customers, the most successful ones are the ones who listen to me about this and we take a deliberate deload period for about 2 weeks. If you're really training hard, you might actually break this into 2 seasons for the year that are about 5 months each with a 2-week deload between both of them. So you'd pick 2 major goals for the year, separate by them as much as possible, and then train deliberately for one for 5 months, take an off season, and then train for the next one for 5 months and take another off season. This is a great way to train. And again, in that 2 forward, 1 back format, keeps you nice and fresh, progressing nicely and injury free. When it comes to deciding on which activities to do, don't make your choices based on what you see in magazines or things you used to do when you were 20 years old or in the military or any of that kind of stuff. All of these things will probably have a use by date on them as we get older. If you think about it, there's a reason why you don't see many 80-year-olds out running. Running, for instance, has definitely got an age-based use by date on it, and as we get older, we need to pay attention to these things. Maybe you can ride for a lot longer, you can row for a lot longer. I can choose an activity that's easier on my joints, doesn't come with any of the risks of running, and yet allows me to train my heart and lungs just as effectively. And the same goes for a lot of the lifts in the gym. There's probably a reason why you don't see many 80-year-olds barbell squatting. It just doesn't feel good on their backs anymore. However, you might be able to find plenty of 80-year-olds deadlifting. So just because it's a barbell doesn't mean that the exercise is no good, but it may be no good for you. Don't make your choices based on ego, make them based on what makes your body feel best. And the way to tell this is if an exercise is giving you a joint problem afterwards, like for instance you squat and your back hurts, or you squat and your knees hurt, then maybe it's now not the time to be barbell squatting. However, you might be doing these exercises and feel fine, then by all means keep including them in your workout. But smart selection of exercises means you're going to be able to train pain-free and injury-free for a much longer period of time, and that's going to be the most beneficial thing when it comes to your training, not what's the hardest thing you can do right now. I have to make a special note for the guys I call the Peter Pans. These are the guys who are 50, 60 years old and still want to do things that 20-year-olds do. These are the guys who want to fight MMA or still be able to do whatever they did in the military. That's just not you right now. And maybe now is the time to come to terms with that and actually accept the reality of where you are. Where you are, you've got a sore Achilles, you've got 2 sore elbows, you're 30 kilo overweight. Maybe that's actually the stuff you want to pay attention to rather than this ideal of yourself that you had from 20 years ago. Now, a final caution, as always, about bulking. Really trying to deliberately gain weight to force feed muscle growth is problematic at any age, but in particular after you pass 40, because the health consequences of it are far, far higher for those of us past 44 years old. If you look at heart attack statistics, you'll see that it's more problematic the older you get, the heavier you are. If you want to bulk to gain muscle, a smart way to do things is like a 4 weeks forward, 2 to 3 weeks cut, and then repeat. If you're following the 2 on 1 off format I was talking about, I would do a 6-week bulk followed by a 3-week cut and repeat that over and over. And the reason they would be a 2 to 1 ratio is that fat loss is far faster than muscle gain, and it's probably going to take you half the time to lose the fat as it took you to try to gain the muscle in the first place. As a rough rule of thumb, you're not going to gain more than 1 pound of muscle per week. It's not possible. Statistically, it's not possible. You are not a one-off case of evolution that would allow you to be faster than what the fastest study has ever proven. You're also over 40, so there's no way you're gaining more than 1 pound of muscle a month. And realistically, at our age, it's going to be more like half a pound a week. That means maximum weight gain for a month, 2 pounds, 1 kilo. If you're bulking and you're gaining more than 1 kilo per month in an attempt to gain muscle faster, all you're gaining faster is fat. You're not actually gaining more muscle, you're just gaining fat. There's no need to try to get fatter than you already are because muscle rate isn't going to increase. Slow down the rate of weight gain, allow the muscle rate gain to catch up, and it also means that your cut in the next phase will be shorter and easier. As a rough rule of thumb, never allow yourself to get above 20% body fat. 20% body fat is only a few percent higher than that sweet spot that I always aim for with my clients, which is 12 to 15%. 12 to 15% is that about the rough point where your abs start to become visible and everyone you know thinks of you as that really fit guy they know, and they tell all their friends about this really fit friend they've got. 20% will be about the point where people go, oh, you work out? Really? Because they can't even tell because you're covered in blubber. So as you can see, there's not a huge amount that's special for 40-year-old relative new trainees, but there are a few things we need to keep in mind so that we make the best progress possible. Probably the best things that people need to keep in mind: 1, always warm up. 2, start with the minimum, not the maximum. Add weight slowly. Make sure you have deloads both every 2 to 3 weeks, as well as a couple of times a year as an off season. And finally, don't allow yourself to gain too much weight.